Let's meet someone who is helping people break free from burnout and the good girl trap to live authentically. I'm Kate Save. The Inspired CEO starts now. Welcome to The Inspired CEO, where each episode we explore the innovative wellness practices that are driving success and longevity in the modern business world. Dr. Michelle McQuaid is an honorary fellow at Melbourne University and one of LinkedIn's top 10 mental health thought leaders. She helps individuals break free from perfectionism and burnout through evidence-based self-compassion and leadership practices. She has just released a new book called The Perfectly Imperfect Women's Journal. So welcome, Michelle.
Thanks, Kate.
Well, it's great to have you in here. And as I said earlier, my daughter has actually been picking up this book and reading it with me at night. The storybook. And it's interesting to see a 10-year-old girl's mind just ticking through. So tell me a little bit about what brought you to write this book.
Yeah, well, probably not unlike your daughter. I was about 5 years old when I grabbed a book at the supermarket called The Perfectly Imperfect Little Girl. In those days, Walt Disney used to have these little golden book stands at the end of the checkout. Yes. And so this was a very precious gift in our house. There wasn't a lot of money, so books were what you got. And I saw this book on the cover. It was bright yellow. There was this hand-drawn illustration of a little girl looking very calm and serene in the middle, like her hands were on her tummy. She looked all calm. But around the edge, there were these other images of the same little girl pulling her sister's hair, breaking a vase, like hiding her head in shame. Yeah. And I connected with those images. I'd probably done most of those things that day already. And so I couldn't really read at that age. I took the book to my mother and I said, "This is the book." And she read The Good Little Bad Little Girl. Are you sure? And I was like, yes, definitely sure. And so that night, home in the bunk beds, my sister tucked up, Mum read the story. And it was all about how the good little girl was quiet and polite and she didn't argue, she was tidy, she didn't eat too much. But there was this bad little girl and she was loud and disruptive and messy. And the big surprise was that the good little girl and the bad little girl were the same little girl. But if you made the good little girl grow taller and taller and the bad little girl smaller and smaller, then you would be happy and loved. That was the end of the book. And I made my poor mother read this book over and over and over again. I think it was my first self-help book, Kate. Yeah. And I was trying to figure out, if I just hear this enough, maybe I can make that good little girl grow taller, which of course I failed miserably at. But I think many of us, somewhere in our childhood, receive these messages. Often for girls, it's to be good. For guys, it's often be a tough guy or a real man. And these societal expectations then plant these seeds so early in life we often don't know they're there, but are shaping us decades on, and often not in great ways when it comes to exhaustion and burnout.
Absolutely. And so your early research, so you studied for how many years?
Yeah, I studied overall for about 10 years. I mean, I did an undergraduate in communications way back when, and then I got really interested in human behaviour in workplaces. Yes. How did we bring out the best in people consistently in workplaces? And I realised we often didn't know a lot, right? We were relying on a lot of carrots to reward people or sticks to punish people, and that would get compliance, but rarely ever commitment. So I went back to school, I did a master's in positive psychology, a PhD in systems change, and then I've spent the last 15 years in workplaces of all sizes with leaders, with teams, trying to help us figure out how do we thrive even in the midst of struggle at work. But I kept coming up against the same challenge, no matter how good the science was, how easy the practices were. Often people would come back and go, yeah, I really meant to, but I was just too busy. I was too busy to put my well-being as a priority. And when we kept scratching away and digging into the data, well, what made us too busy? Because we're all busy, but we choose to prioritise certain things over others. We kept finding these societal beliefs about gender that were often seeded when we were kids, kind of got in the way. So for women, it's often, well, I'm so busy looking after everybody else. Yes, or I'm so busy over-preparing for all the things. I don't have time to look after myself. And for guys, again, it was often in that kind of tough guy, well, you know, I've got to be more competitive and assertive and aggressive, so I can't connect with people in the way I want to at work, or I'll be thought of as soft. And so both these different paths that we often get put on early in life are not awesome for our well-being, and certainly not great for our energy or to help us avoid burnout when things get really hard.
So you had a real shift in what you had been practicing and what you'd learned, and then you question yourself, is there another way? Is there something I'm missing? And what was that aha moment for you that helped you to get to this?
Yeah, well, I think like many researchers, it's often a sample of one of ourselves. And so for me personally, when I was doing that work, I was working in large organisations in global roles like PricewaterhouseCoopers and IBM, travelling all over the world. And I got to sort of my mid to late 30s, and it was everything I could do to get out of bed each day. On paper, life looked great, checked all the boxes, great career, financial security, world travel, good family. My eldest son was 4 years old at the time. I was in good health comparatively. But keeping up with the life I had created was becoming exhausting. And so I got curious. I'm like, what am I missing here?
What are you keeping up with?
Exactly. Like, how is this not the formula for success? Am I not there yet? And so that was what really sent me back to school, to start understanding more about what helps us thrive as human beings. And again, that was interesting. I learned so much, was super useful. But then I just couldn't quite figure out why, for myself and others, do we not choose to prioritise those things more? And again, I kept bumping into, oh my goodness, like right back in that little golden book, these ideas got seeded, and I'm still trying to be the good girl. And the good girl is never selfish and puts herself first, and therefore she doesn't prioritise her own well-being.
That is so interesting. And I think that is something that resonates a lot with me, because I will say to my friends that I'm being selfish this weekend and they'll be like, oh, if only I could do that. And I'm like, you can. You can go for a massage, go for a walk, go and lay on the beach for a little bit, and the world's still there when you come back. And my husband has learnt that if I don't do anything for myself, because I've tried that too, because I get this selfish feeling like we do, he literally will send me out of the house. You need
Wise
to go,
man.
And if I let it go too long, I find that there is that spiral where you're like, well, no, I don't want to go for a massage. I don't want to go for a walk. I don't want to go to the beach. Like, you actually let yourself get to the point where nothing can make you happy. So at least we've both got this awareness now that my selfishness ends up in a better wife, better parent, and you enjoy just life in general.
I've gotten to a point where when somebody tells me I'm being selfish, I think that's a great compliment. I say, thank you so much.
I've taken that courage.
Thank you, that's telling me I'm looking after myself.
And that shame I should feel, I don't care anymore. And that's the hard part, isn't it? That I think there's also this expectation around priorities with spending money, which I absolutely get. But sometimes not spending the money on the things that matter most, which is looking after yourself, ends up in wasting money in many other areas.
And I think we get stuck in this kind of warped idea of what kindness looks like. And so we definitely see this in the research with women. We're trying to save the money or spend the money on everybody else, or not take the time for ourselves, or do all the work to prepare to make things easier and run more smoothly for everybody else, or silence ourselves so we don't rock the boat, don't make a fuss, don't make people feel uncomfortable. And we do all of this because we think they're acts of love and that we're being kind. But what we find again is when you dig into the data, it's actually nothing kind about many of these things. They come more from a place of we're trying to control situations so we can keep ourselves feeling safe. And again, we genuinely believe it's going to help other people. That's part of why they're hard to break free of these beliefs. But the reality is, when we're silencing ourselves, not rocking the boat or saying what needs to be said, there's nothing really kind about that, because we're robbing each other of the chances we need to learn and grow and figure out how to do something differently. We're not having those honest conversations. And when we don't take the time to look after ourselves, to fit our own oxygen masks, as we often say, there's nothing kind about that, right? I'm just getting more and more exhausted. And one of the big things that came up in the research with the women is just how resentful we start to feel towards everybody else. Nothing kind in that, but also how much we tend to lose that sense of self-identity and who we are and what we're about. Well, it's hard to give the best of us if I've lost my sense of self.
Yes,
There's
and
nothing kind about that.
I think that is something that I would hear from a lot of people I know, that nothing makes them happy anymore because they've gone past that point of where those little things would have been enough, but they didn't do them. And then it's a very dark place to come up from there. So going back, if there was something you could tell your younger self, what would you do? What would you change?
Yeah, so what we put in the storybook was actually, you know what, some days you'll get dressed without any fuss. Other days you'll try on everything you own and say, why do all my stupid clothes suck? And either way, you'll be okay.
Yes.
And I think that's a big part of it, right? Is that, you know what, some days you're going to nail it. Other days you're going to fall really short of where you want to be. And either way, it's okay. We're here to learn and grow. That is the point of this human adventure. It's why nature made us all perfectly imperfect, so that we could learn and grow and adapt and evolve as a species. And so if we take that pressure off ourselves about, I need to be doing it perfectly, I need to be making everybody else happy, it's my job to protect other people instead of letting them have their own learning and growth, then suddenly it's like, oh, okay, there's a bit more space to breathe. The other thing we found in the research is it can be really helpful as we start to notice these patterns, as you were describing so beautifully before, to start asking ourselves, well, on whose terms and for whose benefit? And what we find with women, we know instinctively, the answer to that is really just my terms and just my benefit, because we're social creatures, we want to be with each other, but it also can't always be at my cost. And so when we're getting to those dark places you were describing before, it's often been, it's at my cost, it's at my cost, it's at my cost. And there's nothing coming back to renew, to support, to look after me, from me or maybe the people around me. I can't go on like that. And so we really see often women 18 to 24, most feeling, 77% of Australian women still saying, as of December 2024, I feel the need to be this good girl. And then by the time we see women about 35 plus, they're exhausted, moving to burnout, trying to keep up with those expectations, and only then do they start looking for a different path. So I love your question, what would our younger selves like to know? The other thing is what helps women break free of these beliefs is mentoring and role modelling from other women. So for those of us who are maybe a little further down the path, managing to shake some of it off, we've seen women over 65, only about half of them are still feeling the need to be good girls. So what can we share and offer forward, right?
Makes perfect sense. And I think I always look to people older than me for wisdom, and just for that reason that they've felt like this before, and what did they do and what have they learned, because they've got past it and they're still here.
Still telling the story.
When you're sitting in it, you think, I'm never going to get past this. How can I get past this?
And also that you can't see the other way. I think sometimes you have to see it to believe it, and then see a path forward for it. And so I think for all of us as women, there's a real opportunity here to help each other through breaking free of these beliefs.
And tell me a little bit about your childhood. So it sounds like whatever was really caught up in there, what was that, and how did you eventually let that out decades later?
So for me, life didn't start in the easiest of experiences. I grew up in a house where there was a lot of trauma and pain. My dad was just back from the Vietnam War, and so in those days that was a thing of great shame. They were not celebrated or welcomed home. He had PTSD, but we didn't know that at the time, and so he self-medicated on alcohol and drugs. He'd often have flashbacks and running around the house thinking the Viet Cong were in there. And so he was a person really struggling. My mother, bless her, I was at her 21st birthday, so a very young mum, very under-resourced, an accidental pregnancy. They did what you did in the 70s and they got married. And it was just not a recipe for anybody to be healthy or happy. And so up to about 4.5 when they got divorced, our home literally was often a battlefield. And those are the years that your brain and nervous system are doing so much development. So I grew up very hypervigilant. I grew up with a lot of trauma and PTSD that was undiagnosed for years. It wasn't an easy situation. My mother, bless her, left when I was about 4.5. She had the first no-fault divorce in Victoria, which meant she could go and just say, I want a divorce, and not have to litigate everything that was going on in our home, which was a big shift. And again, it's only around that time that women could first get a bank account without needing their husband or father to sign for one for them. So we take for granted these freedoms today, say, but it's only about 50 years since we were in these situations. So she headed out, single mum, not a lot of money. She herself was obviously very traumatised. So even though we were out of the violence at that stage, the next years weren't easy. And when I was 16, I left home. So I managed to get myself through school. I worked on the checkouts at Kmart, finished my schooling, got myself to university. But I was really, again, I was like white knuckling it the whole way because my nervous system was just, And so it really probably took until that time in my 30s where life just said, you are going to slow down. Whether you want to, you can keep ticking it off the list, but if we don't go back and do some healing and reckoning here with what this journey has been, then the way forward is just going to be so much harder and more difficult than you need.
And what was that last day that you got out of bed knowing that this was burnout and it had to change? What was that for you?
Well, again, for me, this was sort of early 2000s. Burnout wasn't really a thing that we talked about. I just thought I was exhausted and couldn't get out of bed. And it took me a while to quite figure out like what was wrong with me, because I just thought I was being ungrateful, right? I had this beautiful life. We were living in New York at the time. And I was like, why can I not enjoy what I've worked so hard to get to? And I think it was less getting out of bed and more crawling out of bed.
Yes.
And around that time, Elizabeth Gilbert released Eat, Pray, Love. And in that book, she talks about her own kind of spiritual awakening. And that really got me sort of started more down a path of just making space for some stillness and sitting in meditation and sort of, one thing led to the next thing. I remember I'd come home from work and I was literally slumped on the couch eating takeaway out of the container, and the Jon Stewart show came on, and on there he was interviewing a professor at Harvard whose course had become the most popular on campus, which was the first time something other than economics was the number one course, and it was a course in positive psychology. And I literally remember kind of dropping the fork and container and going, there is a science to human thriving. Why has nobody told me this before now? Rushing out the next day, getting the book, that led to the masters. And so it was really that moment of knowing I was in this really dark and difficult place, having no idea how to crawl out of it, and then starting to find a set of tools and community that was interested in, well, how do we thrive as human beings, even in the midst of struggle?
That is so fascinating. I think I first discovered positive psychology in the early 2000s in Australia because I had a health consultancy and a psychologist came to join my team and he was a positive psychologist. And I had to try and get him to explain. I'm like, I don't understand. And eventually I was like, I need to see you. What is this? Being the best version of yourself. And the way he described it to me was, instead of having to be broken and go from -5 to 0, you can start anywhere, but you can go forward. You don't just stop at neutral. And I think that was really eye-opening for me, that don't wait until you're broken to do something.
And I think for me, the gift of the positive psychology research was understanding that everybody's life has ebbs and flows. I don't know, I was as scared of the flows. When things were good, I'd have what Dr. Brene Brown calls that foreboding joy. I'd be like, when things were good in my life, I'd be like, oh my God, like at the top of the roller coaster going, it's all about to fall out. How will I cope? Whereas I was probably more comfortable when things were hard because I'd grown up with so much of things being hard. It's like, okay, down here, there's no height to fall from. And so for me, that understanding was, whether I'm at the -5, the 0, the +5, heading to the 8, wherever it is, that's actually normal and healthy. We're meant to ebb and flow. It's part of how we learn and grow. And so rather than feeling I always had to be improving my well-being, should be going up like this, that actually this was what healthy well-being looked like. And so how did I have the tools and knowledge to enjoy the highs, to be okay in the lows, knowing that I would get out of that. There would come learning and growth and there would be movement forward, rather than feeling like I'm going to fall through the bottom here and there's no way up.
In that alone, I think people watching today will get so much hope if they are sitting at that low point, that it will move. It won't be stuck there forever, but it doesn't mean they're going to get this epiphany
Yes.
of everything's going to be good for the rest of my life.
No, it's not meant to be, right? Again, because then we stop the learning and the growing that comes from it.
Yes.
So I like to think about how am I caring for my well-being rather than how am I improving my well-being, because there's a lot less pressure and a lot more reality in that I'm caring through the ebbs and flows. Some days I need to go to bed and just pull the covers over my head, and that's what caring for my well-being looks like. Other days I'm ready to dance along the beach and catch up with friends and do all sorts of great adventures, and that's okay as well. But it all has its place.
So last of all, how do you manage family, work, and your own health? What do you do?
So gently is probably the key word. I think there's a lot less striving than what it used to be before I understood all of this. For me, my mornings are sort of a really important sacred time. So I try to get up early. I'll head out to the beach. I'm lucky I live within walking distance. If I can be there for sort of as the sun's coming up, to just kind of ground and practice. I'll often meditate or do a little chanting as I do that walk, take the dog with me for a bit of company, come home, give the kids a hug, even though they're teenage boys and they don't like hugs really anymore, they still get their hug. I need the oxytocin shot even if they don't. And then, we'll ease into the work day. Again, trying to take regular breaks. One of the big ahas for me was understanding we have an ultradian rhythm that runs through our day, just like we have a circadian rhythm at night. So at night we're moving through these waves of sleep, most of us know, same during the day. So we're not just turning on in the morning and going at a steady energy all day, we're pulsing like every living thing does, and we're moving in these kind of 90-minute to 2-hour waves. So as I go through my day, I tend to look at sort of each 90-minute to 2-hour period, where's my rest and recovery micro break in that? And that could be 5 minutes lying on the floor and breathing. I'm lucky I work at home most days, so that kind of works. It's not too weird for everybody in the office. But if I'm out and about, it might be walking around the block, or it might just be taking a few quiet minutes, or putting a favourite song on that just like renews me with energy, or whatever it is. But I'm quite careful with my energy throughout the day as I'm moving through these waves, rather than just getting to like the end of the day and feeling like I'm crashing. Exactly. And then if I can, I try to finish the end of my day with, again, another walk on the beach to see the sunset. And for me, that's a nice kind of bookend to my days, to just go, okay, I'm in nature, I'm feeling grounded, I've got the space just to appreciate, and sometimes to, reflect or have sorrow over what today has been and process that.
Incredible. I think that is such a great way to end this, to help people understand that there are rhythms throughout the day as there are the sleep cycles. People are pretty aware of the sleep cycles because there's been a lot of media about that. But during the day, you sometimes wonder, am I on track? Why am I not having a good moment? And then it can change all of a sudden.
Why do I need the cookie jar at about 3:30? Well, that's because the energy has gone down that far.
There we go.
There you go.
Well, we can get a Be Fit Food protein ball.
Absolutely. Much better choice.
Well, thank you so much, Michelle. This is The Inspired CEO, and we'll be right back.